Excellent.
Comfortably Zoned Radio Network proudly presents Golenbock University. And here's Al Blumkin to introduce everybody. Take it away, Al.
Hello there, everybody. This is Al Blumkin. And in this episode of Golenbock University, we have the man who this program was named for, Peter Golenbock. And I'm happy to say my good friend, great baseball historian, and the original father of trivia way back when, David Nemec. And tonight we're going to discuss the life and times of George Steinbrenner. Gentlemen,
Thank
welcome.
you, Al. I can begin because I probably have the earliest knowledge of George.
Okay.
I grew up in Bay Village, Ohio, the westernmost suburb of Cleveland.
Did you really?
Yeah. The home of Dr. Sam Shepard.
And the home of all the Steinbrenners.
Otto Graham.
And Otto Graham.
Yeah.
Yes. Did you know Otto Graham as well?
I did. But
wow.
Yeah, I knew George a little better. George, I didn't have contact as George as a young kid, even though he had a younger sister who was a year ahead of me in school. I knew her pretty well. I knew of them before I met George at all. They lived in a lakefront mansion on Lake Road in Bay Village.
Right.
They were the only family in Bay Village, as far as I knew, they had a caretaker, and the caretaker was African American. As a consequence, his son went to our high school and was the first to integrate Bay Village High School. Now there's a substantial number of blacks living in Bay Village, but then it was really a breakthrough.
George was going to Culver Academy, no?
He was going to. His father never went. As far as I know, he never went to public school.
Right.
I don't know if he started in Culver at year one, but he definitely went to Culver Academy, and I think it had a deep influence on his life. And I think we'll get into that as we go along.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I didn't really meet George until I was in the Junior Olympics. I was younger than the kids in my class. My birthday was late in the year. So I was in the 12 and 13 age group, and there was a 13 or a 14, 15 age group. And George, it was the summer after he graduated from Williams College, where he played a little football, but his major sport was track. And the football coach who ran the Junior Olympics, Bay football coach, I don't know if he hired George or George volunteered, but he took over the Junior Olympics program that summer. And because I was tall and because I was, a pretty good athlete for my age, George decided that I was going to do the softball throw, the 50-yard dash, and the high jump. And I'd never high jumped in my life.
Right.
And throughout the summer, working with George, he helped me with my softball throw. He helped me with the 50-yard dash, but he really helped me with the high jump. He taught me how to. Then it was the scissors kick. It really wasn't the Fosbury flop or anything like that. But for kids my age, it was all the scissors kick. And I got up to, I don't know what it was, maybe 5'5", 5'6" on the bar, and that was as far as I went. But still, it was a real breakthrough for me. And I remembered him well. It was a good experience working with him. And then I really didn't have much contact with him, but I knew that he ended up being a graduate assistant at Ohio State and worked with Woody Hayes.
Before he did that, he was in ROTC, and he went to Lockbourne Air Force Base.
Yeah, in Ohio, in Dayton.
In Ohio, in near Columbus, and at Lockbourne Air Force Base, he took advantage of the fact that his father knew the Secretary of Defense. And I interviewed. One of the books I wrote was called George, which is a biography of Steinbrenner, and I had the opportunity back in the 80s to interview all sorts of people who were at Lockbourne at the time. And they just were furious with this guy because even though he was of low rank, he was totally protected by the chiefs on the base because his father was close to the Secretary of Defense.
I neglected to mention that his father was a shipping magnate in Cleveland, the Great Lakes.
He was indeed.
Henry Steinbrenner, who had been a really fine college athlete himself and encouraged George's athletics endeavors. And,
in fact, his father,
George,
let me interrupt you for a second. His father almost ended up in the Olympics. And the reason he did not, his father, Henry, did not end up in the Olympics was because he had fallen in love. And apparently the wife-to-be gave him a choice. And it was to pick either her or the Olympics. And I think quite wisely he picked her over the Olympics.
Oh, yeah. No, I didn't know about that part of his family history. But interestingly, he coached under Woody in 1954 when Ohio State ended up number one in the nation. Then he was a graduate assistant. He's getting a master's in
graduate assistant,
phys ed.
right?
And then he moved to Northwestern in 55.
Yep.
And one of his neighbors was a family named Redinger. And Jim Redinger was Bay Village's greatest football player probably ever. I think he might still be able to make that claim. He graduated from Bay in 1955, and Steinbrenner was hired as an assistant coach at Purdue. And Steinbrenner recruited Redinger to come to Purdue. And Redinger became a pretty good ball player there and spent 2 years under Steinbrenner while Steinbrenner was assistant coach. And then he left coaching.
Well, let me stop you for a second.
He really invested heavily, and he bought the Kinsman Marine Transit Company in 1957.
Can David hear me?
Peter,
I want to interrupt you for a minute to talk about George as a football coach for a moment, because that's another part of his life where I interviewed a whole bunch of people who played under him, the football players at both. I'm sorry, it was not Ohio State. It was Purdue. He was at Purdue first, and then
he was at Ohio State first. He went from Ohio State 54.
I'll tell you why I know he was
55,
at Purdue.
And then Purdue 56 and 7, I believe.
I know he was at Purdue because I interviewed the quarterback of Purdue, who became an NFL star, who remembered playing under George. So I know he was there 1 year at Purdue, and I know he was 1 year at Northwestern. At any rate, the players loved him. They absolutely loved him.
Yeah, he was a fine coach.
A fine coach, and he very badly wanted to do that for a living. And what happened was, his father said to him, if you continue as a football coach, and if you do not come back to, what was it called? Kinsman Marine was the company.
Yeah, that was...
if you don't come back to Kinsman Marine, you're out. That was the choice. The father, who was a tough martinet, said to George, you either come, join the company now, or you're out. That was the end of his football career. He went back to Cleveland to work for his father.
But then he bought the company, and took it over, but he was still dissatisfied. And his sports love caught up with him when he bought the Cleveland Pipers.
No question.
And brought them into existence in 1960, and they moved into the ABL in 1961. Mm-hmm. And Steinbrenner hired a coach, John McClendon,
who I
was
interviewed.
The first black head coach of any major professional sports team.
Correct.
And McClendon had coached previously at Tennessee A&I, where he had worked with a kid named Dick Barnett. And Barnett had been drafted by the Syracuse Gnats in the NBA. And when McClendon took over the Pipers, he went after Barnett and convinced Barnett to jump the Gnats and join the Pipers in 61-62. And McClendon ended up finishing the year. he was fired, and the reasons are still somewhat obscure to me, and maybe Peter at some point you can enlighten us.
I can tell you. I can. I mean, George, even when he owned the Pipers, was George. I mean, what was so interesting is that he was running this Pipers during a time when he was also working for Kinsman Marine, and his father refused to give him a dime for the team.
Right.
So for the
his father, in fact, told him if he continued, he would have nothing to do with anything else he did in his life, really.
Yeah, well, that's kind of true. But George loved running this team, but he was doing it on a shoestring. And oh boy,
when he fired McClendon, then he
fired McClendon because he had the opportunity to get, I think it was Bill Sharman.
He got Bill Sharman, and Bill Sharman finished out the season, and they won the ABL. And then Steinbrenner pulled off a real coup. He signed Jerry Lucas, who had been drafted by the Cincinnati Royals in the territorial draft. When he signed Lucas to a contract to play for the Pipers, and the Pipers then folded before Lucas ever played a game. But Lucas nevertheless stuck it out for the entire contract.
Yep.
And refused to join the NBA.
Can David hear me? I don't get this. Can you hear me?
Yeah, no, I can hear you.
Okay. Because I'm trying to interrupt you. I mean, I know you'll go on for a while, but
I just wanted to continue for a couple minutes, Peter, and then I was going to let you. I was going to get up to the Yankees part. What I know.
But there's so many different parts. There's so many different parts of the Piper story that we could do this sort of you and then me and then you and then me, and it would probably be better in terms of the chronology for it. George always wanted stars. The same with he didn't do much different with the Pipers as he did with the Yankees later on. He always wanted stars. I mean, when he got Lucas, it was the most amazing thing because all he had for Lucas was promises. He didn't have any money whatsoever. And what he did when he went to the NBA to try to bring the Cleveland team into the league, basically he had a check for $250,000, which he was going to present to the NBA people for the admission. And, of course, when he handed the thing in, it bounced. It bounced as high as the moon. And other things happened to him, too. He was in financial trouble. He had a partner by the name of Jim Stouffer. Stouffer was one of the people involved in the Pipers. And you know Stouffer Foods.
Vern Stouffer, who owned the Indians.
Vern Stouffer was his father, right.
Yeah.
Jim Stouffer and George were very, very close friends. And somewhere along the line in the Pipers, George Steinbrenner stole one of Jim Stouffer's blank checks and filled it out for $25,000 and passed it off. And when you jump ahead to when George wanted to buy the Cleveland Indians, the reason Vernon Stouffer wouldn't sell it to him is because George had stolen his son's check, and Vernon was really pissed at him.
Rightfully so. Wow.
Now you.
Now that even colors even more my what I know about the Indians in the early 70s and how close Steinbrenner came to being the owner there, and how I think the entire history of baseball in the latter part of the century would have changed if Steinbrenner had owned the Indians instead of.
Yep.
Yeah, it was really sad. I'm really sad to know that about George. I didn't know about that check.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
I mean, what was the odds? What was the odds that the owner of the Cleveland Indians at the time George wanted to buy it was Vernon Stouffer? It could have been anybody else in the world, and George would have been the owner of the Cleveland Indians.
Yeah.
Well, that's a little karma.
And he wanted badly. He wanted badly to own the Indians.
He terribly wanted. He wanted terribly.
Getting back to the ABL, which really was a fascinating league. I saw them play many times. They played in the Cleveland
you did go see the
not
game.
in the real. Yeah, not in the real. They didn't play in the Cleveland arena. They couldn't get the arena on the dates they needed. So they ended up playing the Cleveland Auditorium.
Yep.
And they were the first. They were the first league, college, pro, whatever, to feature the 3-point shot. And
yes.
Along with having first a black head coach. They were a very, very progressive league, and with a little more support and the backing of a couple more key cities and key owners. I think that league could have really been the forerunner of the ABA, and probably
no question. It was Abe Saperstein who put it together.
Right. Yeah.
He was the owner of the Harlem Globetrotters, and he's the one who put that league together. Now, let me ask you, David.
In the Pittsburgh had a thing called the Pittsburgh Rents.
Oh, yeah. Definitely the Pittsburgh Rents, and they had Connie Hawkins.
Yeah.
Connie Hawkins.
Connie Hawkins. Right.
Philadelphia Warriors.
Yeah, the ABL did have players who had been banned. They had Bevo Francis.
The Cleveland team had that great Kentucky center who had been banned.
Bill Spivey.
Yeah, Bill
Spivey. Yeah.
He didn't play much because he was kind of out of shape, but they took him. They gave him a shot.
Yeah. No, the ABL had a lot of interesting ball players.
Sure did. When you were watching these games, David, from what I understand is that Steinbrenner, even though he was an owner, would come running out onto the court and argue with the referees and scream at his own players. Did you notice any of that?
I didn't notice any. I did notice some interaction between him and the players. Yeah, which puzzled me. Because I'd never seen. Because
owners don't do that.
Yeah, right. That did. It changed my image of him a bit too, because I had come away from my previous image had solely been formed by my Junior Olympics experience with him. And
where he was kind
to you. Back to that.
Right.
Yeah, it was not only that, but I might as well. I can tell you. I'll tell you a story that can put that into perspective. When I was doing an article for 9 magazine a few years ago, I did it on 3 women who played baseball, and I called it Leagues of Their Own Design. They couldn't make the Colorado Bullets. They were too old, but they had put together other forms of baseball, vintage baseball. One played vintage baseball, a teammate of mine there. One played men's senior league, was a teammate of mine. Another, when I was desperate for a third, I went back to a high school friend of mine who had played against me in elementary school in softball. I knew that she'd probably gone on an athletic career of some kind. So I contacted her, and in the course of our exchange of emails, I finally asked her, I said, tell me who your favorite coach was. Who was the best coach you ever had, your experience? And I'll share it with you, I think mine was. Mm-hmm. And we exchanged emails, and we both had the same guy, George Steinbrenner. Of all the coaches I ever had, he was the only one who really taught me how to do anything. He taught me how to high jump. He taught me. He helped me get out of the blocks, in the 50-yard dash. He taught me how to hold the ball, and when the softball throw, he was an excellent coach. And her name was Jan. She's still a good friend of mine. And she said he did the same thing for me. And this was only in track, and Jan's sport was really baseball, and mine was too. But it was amazing, and this comes full circle in that when I went back and started thinking about my best overall coach, the guy who really helped me the most in baseball was not a coach at the time.
Uh-huh.
He was a fellow player on my high school team in Florida.
Oh.
And this guy, of all people, became George Steinbrenner's ultimate nemesis in a way. Dick Hauser. Dick Hauser.
For heaven's sakes.
Yeah.
For heaven's sakes.
Yeah.
2 wonderful characters. Wow. Isn't that something?
Yeah, Dick was a fantastic baseball mind and strategist, even as a high school player.
Let me tell you about one guy. When George was at Lockbourne, he also coached. He was also the football coach and the basketball coach, not only of Lockbourne, but of the local Catholic high school team there. And he found a kid in the Catholic school who he thought would make a fine runner as a track star. And he took this kid under his wing. The kid was poor. He took the kid under his wing. He worked with him, the kid told me, literally every day, and taught him the fundamentals of track. And the kid went on to win the 100-yard state championship in the state of Ohio after working with George. So he had that in him.
He was that good. He was that good.
Yeah, he had that in him. The problem he had, of course, he was not good working when he owned teams. He was not good working with coaches. He was not good working with general managers. He was not good working with PR people.
I wonder how he would have been working with athletic directors.
Oh, he would have had to take over. George was one of those people who knew better than everybody else. He knew, as you know, with the Yankees, he knew better than all his general managers. He knew better than Billy Martin or any of his managers. He knew better than the PR guys. And it was the same way with the Cleveland Pipers. I interviewed a couple of his PR guys. One guy got fired because some article got into the newspaper and George was angry that it was in there. They fired him.
Yeah. I can believe it.
And they fired McClendon because he had an opportunity to get somebody more famous, and that was Bill Sharman.
Yeah, that was sad. I remember that when everybody was puzzled. People were baffled. They were writing into the papers. Why are you firing this guy?
Well, there was another reason for it too.
He had to make it. Is there nothing racial? I hope because that was
nothing
what
racial. Nothing racial.
Okay.
But when they went to play the championship, they didn't have any money. And they showed up and they had real difficulty paying the hotel bill and that sort of thing. And McClendon went to the newspapers and blew the whistle on the fact that his players were were having financial problems because the ownership wasn't doing its part. And as you know with George, anybody who goes public with a criticism ends up getting fired.
Yeah.
Sort of like our president.
Like our president, yes.
Yeah, I think that there is something genetic because from what I know of the Steinbrenner family, and I didn't know very much, but I learned this later in life, his younger sister Judy, as I said, was a year ahead of me in school. Right. And she suddenly disappeared. Whoa. I mean, I think I was in the 7th grade and she was in the 8th grade. And then, I didn't have much association with 8th grade girls. I was older women in the 7th grade. Right. So, I mean, I didn't really pay much attention except I just noticed she was gone. And I didn't find this out until years later from a woman who was in her graduating class whom I struck up a correspondence with. She's a writer and she's now in Italy. I said, whatever happened to Judy Steinbrenner? She was in your class and then she disappeared. She said, you don't know what happened to her? And Judy had been popular. She loved being in her class. She loved everything about it. Yep. Her mother and father, Henry and his wife, O'Haley, came to the high school, and they brought her into the principal's office, and they actually had to physically drag her out of the building because she was going to a private school. They decided that this was as far as she could go in public school, the 8th grade. She now had an opportunity to go to the best private school in Cleveland. So, I mean, there was something, I think, in the whole family that kind of ended up in George's basket, too.
Oh, absolutely. Well, his father was the dictator. You didn't argue with him. You did what he told you to do. So I interviewed a couple of the people who worked for him at Kinsman Marine, and he was one of the stingiest characters you could ever imagine. He made those people on Christmas Eve work until 5 o'clock. None of you people better leave your seats until 5 o'clock. This is on Christmas Eve, for crying out loud. If somebody lost a postage stamp, he would go bananas. It was that sort of thing. And he fired people all the time. Henry Steinbrenner, if you didn't do it right, he would fire you. He must have fired George 5 or 6 times. The problem being, of course, is you can't really fire your son.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, Henry was a piece of work. Absolutely. And everybody, all of George's friends who I interviewed for that book said they were scared to death of this guy. And the sad part about it is, of course, that Henry was a legitimate track star. He really was a fabulous, fabulous athlete. Whereas George, who ran at Williams College, he won a few races, but he wasn't terribly, special.
No, I never got that feeling.
That was really hard. The people from Williams who I interviewed about George said to me that literally nobody, worked hard at getting faster and didn't. I mean, he did the sprints. He did all the things you're supposed to do to get faster, and he never got faster. And that must have been incredibly, incredibly difficult on George's psyche, because always, of course, George was trying to compete with his old man, who was in every way better than he.
Well, that brings up a whole bunch of father-son stuff for everybody on every level.
Yeah, he was the only son. There were two daughters and two younger.
He was a son. Yep.
Yeah, so it all fell into his lap.
Alan.
Yeah.
Anything on George from your side?
No, I'm just listening to this with fascination.
Yeah, my last contact with him, and it was a very peripheral one, was in 1985. I was living in San Francisco. I was hired to do the Yankees yearbook, and it was a history of the Yankees, but they wanted it to begin in 1920. Forget the Highlanders, forget the early years. It began in 1920. So I wrote it, and the guy who put the yearbook together, he took it over, and I gave him the final copy, and then he did some editing himself without consulting me, and the yearbook appeared, and he had made changes like Jimmy Fox becoming Jimmyfox.
Oh,
boy. And I hit the roof. And I cannot let this happen to me. So I wrote directly to George. I don't know if it actually got to him directly, and I explained the situation to him. I said, I am not responsible for this. Please trust me. And I asked him if he remembered me, and I doubt that he did. But he did send a nice letter back, which may have been written by him. I sort of doubt it. But it was signed by him, so I do have an autographed letter from him.
Uh-huh.
But that was my last real contact with George. And,
who was the PR guy?
Yeah.
You remember who the PR guy was?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Who
had a
was
PR guy about every year.
He managed to fire Marty, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, he fired Marty. Okay. Well, I think Marty quit. Marty and Joe Garagiola. Marty saw the writing on the wall. Marty Appel. He was the guy. Marty Appel was the guy who allowed me to come into Yankee Stadium to do the research for Dynasty. And Marty, when he was working for Mike Burke, he had the most marvelous job in the world, because Mike Burke was a wonderful man, and all the people who worked for Mike Burke were equally wonderful people. And then George and Mike Burke decided to go in together to buy the team from CBS, and this was in December of 1972. And by February of 1973, Mike Burke decided, this guy is too difficult to work with, I'm out of here. And so George bought him out, and George had it all by himself. And within, I'd say, 2 months, all of my friends who worked for the Yankees were either fired or they left. Gabe Paul came in from Cleveland with George, and Lee McPhail, and all those other people who were working for Mike Burke were either fired or they left. It was unbelievable. It really was. And hard to watch happen, because my friends loved being a Yankee more than life.
The same thing happened in Brooklyn when O'Malley bought Rickey out.
No question. Exactly the same thing. That's exactly correct.
Yeah.
You were absolutely right. Yeah. George was.
You guys were talking before about what would have happened if Steinbrenner, how it would have changed history if Steinbrenner would have bought Cleveland.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
the interesting part is that had Steinbrenner not been suspended the second time, I learned that from some baseball maven named Golenbock. I don't remember first name. But if Steinbrenner had not been suspended in the Winfield incident the second time, the Yankees championships would not have been won. Bringing in Gabe Paul was a godsend to the organization.
Yeah, he was suspended twice, and during those two suspensions, Gabe Paul first put together that team that won in the 70s.
Gabe Paul first, right?
Gabe Paul first, and then and Gabe came in because George Steinbrenner was suspended for life, shortened to 2 years for his Watergate
contribution
nonsense.
Yeah.
And then with the Winfield business, where he paid a guy $40,000 for dirt on his best player, he was suspended. Howie Spearer, again suspended for life, and then it was 2 years. And during those 2 years, Stick Michael kept the Glorious Five, who I am convinced would have either traded them all away. He'd have traded Jeter, he'd have traded Bernie Williams, he'd have traded Posada, he'd have traded Andy Pettitte, and he certainly would have traded, because he didn't like him at all, Mariano Rivera. But once he got suspended and couldn't put his hands on the team, Stick knew what talented people these people were, and by the time George came back 2 years later, these people had pretty well established themselves, and it was too late to get rid of them.
Peter, if you'll excuse my interrupting, if you guys
it's not interrupting, it's your show.
Would you please give your take on Gossage's criticism of Rivera, and how does that come off to you, who saw both eras? Can put it, the 3-inning save, that kind of thing, is a thing of the past. So Gossage is kind of making it Rivera's issue. How does that come off to you?
How does it come off? I mean, Goose is ordinarily a terrific human being. I don't quite understand, I'll tell you what it's coming off like. It's coming off like the players who played in the 60s who were complaining that the players in the 80s were making millions of dollars when they were making peanuts. It's a different game. It's just a different game. How can you criticize Mariano?
Two different games, actually, from the 60s to the 80s and from the 80s to now.
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying that from when Goose played and from Mariano played, they used relief pitchers different ways. I mean, Sparky Lyle, when Sparky Lyle won the Cy Young Award in 1977.
And then he brought in Goose. After Sparky Lyle won the Cy Young Award, they brought in Goose Gossage to close.
Yeah, well, that's why the Bronx Zoo became such a fabulous book.
Sparky Lyle, that was in the Bronx Zoo.
Yeah, well, that's why Sparky
Lyle
was so
good. That's in 1978 to the Rangers.
That's kind of what Cleveland started doing last year. They didn't necessarily bring in the guy who should be the closer in as the closer, and Gossage seemingly, would have been, and it was strange the way the Yankees used those bullpen guys with Gossage and Lyle.
Well,
I think that was
when one rereads or looks through the Bronx Zoo, and one would think that, boy, this is really exaggerated, that Peter's going in here and putting things in.
Not if you were here and lived through it. It wasn't.
Right. That's exactly right. I think, if anything, you understated stuff. Am I right?
I'm an understated person. You know that, Ralph.
Okay. Wow, it must have been incredible. I was living out in California. But
I was at that Old Timers game when they in 1978 when after Martin had been fired for his one's a born liar, the other's convicted. All of a sudden, they're having his whole time, and all of a sudden they announce that they're bringing Billy Martin back. You know, he comes out and the dugout, and he gets an incredible standing ovation.
It was one of the most bizarre moments in Yankee history.
Incredibly bizarre, yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely bizarre. Because
and
George...
he wasn't going to be taken over then. He was going to...
No, that's right.
At the end of the... That was really bizarre.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly
and
right.
Hauser... It was Hauser that was the manager?
No. Bob Lemon was the manager.
No, it was Bob Lemon.
No, Bob Lemon was the manager.
And
Lemon took over from Billy Martin in the middle of the season and took him to the pennant.
Yeah.
And then Bob Lemon, the next year, Bob Lemon's son was killed.
It
took the heart right out of the poor man.
Yeah, it did.
And George saw that, and George made Billy the manager again for either the second time or the third time, and he'd bring him back for a fourth time and a fifth time. And if he hadn't died, he was bringing him back a sixth time.
I don't know about that. I saw the game.
Clete Boyer told me. He was coming back with Billy. He told me.
I was at the game in Detroit in June of 1988 when the Yankees led 6-1 in the top of the ninth. And as the game progressed and fans started leaving because the Tigers were so far behind, I ended up behind the Yankees dugout by the ninth inning.
That's the game that Guante gave up a great
and the Tigers rallied for 6 runs and finished off Helen Spammell's walk-off home run. And when that the left field seats, Martin turned around and faced right into where I was looking. And the expression on his face was, I can't take it anymore. You know, and they lost 3-2 the next night in 10 innings, and that was it. He never managed again.
Well, he had a lot of days like that, and yet when he wasn't managing, the only thing he ever wanted to do was to go back and manage. Billy was as quirky in his own way as George was in his own way. Billy couldn't stand it when he wasn't managing the Yankees. He could have been the Oakland A's manager for the next 15 years if he had wanted to. He was an Oakland boy. He was from Berkeley. He loved the area. They loved him, and yet come July, August, or whatever season it was, George Steinbrenner calls Billy Martin up on the phone and says to him, if you can get out of your Oakland contract, I want you to come back and manage the Yankees. So what does he do? He busts up his office. He calls the owners a bunch of kikes and gets himself fired and comes back to the Yankees. Crazy.
Absolutely. I'll tell you how loved he is. There's still a guy who drives a construction truck called Billy Ball Construction. And
wow.
It's green and gold, and he drives it around, and he still gets attention from that. And just Billy Ball Construction, as a small business, does very well just driving around with that truck and the phone number. So he when you said it, Peter, I went, yes, he's beloved in this area.
Absolutely.
Were you there? Were you in Oakland in 1980, Ralph? When 81, the strike season?
Yes, I was. What are you referring to?
Well, the way they used the A's pitching staff, and he did very well with it, but he ruined careers.
Not one of those guys, again, according to Peter Golenbock.
I interviewed them all, and not one of them blamed Billy.
No, they didn't.
Nope.
And when you talk overuse, that's another thing that's changed from generation to generation almost. At least twice in my baseball fandom. When do you coddle pitchers? When do you build up their arm strength? Is coddling them the result of all these injuries because they're coddled and they're not brought up? I mean, I'm just reading today's paper. there, the paper on the internet, all 5 of the Met starters, presumably healthy, are being held back. Held back? This is spring training. You would think that everything would come together in their program, that they come into spring training and get into position, and they're healthy and being held back. What's going on? I mean, it's a rhetorical question.
Ralphie,
yes.
I'll tell you what's going on. What's going on is that kids are starting to pitch when they're 7 years old, playing 50-game schedules, being overworked by their amateur coaches, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds. By the time they reach high school, half of them need Tommy John surgery. That's the difference. That's what's happened today. And as a result of all of that, they now have it so that you're supposed to pitch 100 pitches and then they take you out of the goddamn ball game.
The healthiest pitcher on the Mets last year was Bartolo Colon.
Bartolo Colon. Well, he probably wasn't playing Little League. Where's he come out of? The Dominican Republic?
Yeah.
So it's a very, very difficult situation because these pitchers are so prone to injury. It's really quite remarkable how many pitchers end up getting hurt. And I don't know what it is about the Mets. You bring up the
Don't
Mets.
you think it's kind of pitches that they throw, the variety and different types of cut fastballs and all that?
Sure.
Or
I think it's trying to hit 100 miles an hour.
That's the other part of it. Yeah, that's the other part of it. When Nolan Ryan threw the ball 93 and 94 miles an hour, we marveled. When Sandy Koufax threw fast, we were amazed. Nobody else did it. Right. We have a team here in Tampa Bay. Our relief pitchers, they're not so hotsy-totsy, but every single one of them can throw 95 miles an hour. It's astounding how hard
when Bob Feller threw against a horse running.
Yeah. Bob Feller but he was like 105 miles an hour. Somehow they managed to time him at 105.
You don't have control.
They never really measured him accurately, and then he hurt his arm in 47. After that, he lost a good fastball. He still hung on. He was a good pitcher, but he had to do a lot of it on cunning and savvy.
If you don't have
contributed greatly in 54,
and
they were.
Yeah.
Let's go back to your issue of injuries and coddling pitchers. Nobody has quite figured it out. Really. Nobody has quite figured it out. Do you pitch these guys more to strengthen their arms, or do you pitch them less to keep them from getting injured later on? And nobody really knows the answer to that question. So some teams do the former, some teams do
I don't know.
the latter.
I think there is one guy who knows the answer. Nobody wants to listen to him. That's Mike Marshall.
Mike Marshall. Yes, I agree with you. Nobody does want to listen to him.
He was a doctor of physiology as well. I don't know why. He's a PhD.
Kinesiology.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was with him 2 years ago at a SABR meeting. He is now shrunk. Mike Marshall is now about 4'8". You wouldn't believe it. But as brilliant and as controversial as ever. And he tries to teach his kids. The kids pay him to come over to his house, and he teaches them how to pitch with his style and manner in a way so that they don't get hurt. And those kids then go to their baseball teams, and their coaches make them pitch their way. It's incredibly frustrating for Marshall.
It just amazes me. No team ever hired him as a pitching coach and invested in him in a long range basis. I just don't understand.
Yeah, maced him too.
The best pitcher
was a pitching coach with Boston.
He got fired everywhere he went because the managers thought he was trying to usurp his authority wherever he went.
That was because Mike was a very sort of strong-willed person who wanted things done his way.
Johnny Sain I'm talking about Johnny Sain.
Johnny Sain was the same way.
Yeah.
Look, you hire Johnny Sain or Mark Marshall to be your pitching coach. You leave him alone.
Yeah,
you don't tell him your way.
Leo Mazzone from the Braves dedicated his book that came out a few years ago to Johnny Sain.
Sure he did.
Yeah.
He was one of the great pitching coaches, and yet how many teams did he coach? 4 or 5 teams?
Oh, Johnny Saint was all over the place because the manager.
Because he was smarter than the managers, is why.
Yeah.
And he would also piss off the front office by telling the players to walk the golden stairs. Johnny Saint would tell the players, get as much money as you can.
Bowden said when the Yankees dismissed Saint after 1963 that the pitchers were willing to take up a collection to have him stay.
Yep.
And Houck didn't want him because he considered him a threat.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, Houck fired Yogi Berra because he was something of a threat too. I mean, Houck was a marvelous manager, but not a marvelous general manager.
He was terrible.
And that happens too.
He was like Phil Jackson. He was out of his depth.
Well, we'll see. We'll see about
to have good years as a manager in Detroit, did Ralph.
Yes, he did. He was a very, very good manager.
Yeah.
But in terms of a general manager, and the other problem with the Yankees, of course, is that Topping and Webb had stopped buying young kids after 1962.
Yeah, once owners decide to get out, that's the first thing that goes is player development money.
Exactly. So when all those guys, Mantle and Maris and Whitey and the rest of them got hurt, there was absolutely nothing in the farm system. So that when CBS bought the team, Lee McPhail had to spend 5-6 years restocking the farm club. And meanwhile, all the Yankee fans were booing CBS because they were not successful. But it wasn't CBS's fault. It was Topping and Webb's fault.
Right. And they were premeditated. They knew they were leaving back at the end in the last year's 58, 59.
Del Webb was one of the smartest businessmen in the history of the world.
Oh yeah.
Del Webb knew exactly what he was doing whenever he did it.
Well, they did pick up Dooley Womack though. I really like.
Yes, they did. They did. Yes, they had Jerry Kenny too. I had some fine ball players back then.
Right.
Yeah, Horace.
You know who was? There were two that just with all the pedigree in the world was Bobby Mercer and Gibbs, Jake Gibbs, that great quarterback.
Jake Gibbs, yeah. Quarterback in Mississippi, I think it was. Yeah.
Yep, it was.
Ended up as a guy who should have stuck with pro football.
Yes, he should have.
A whole lot of those types.
Yeah.
No, I know it. No, the Yankees.
Alan, you want to end it or add anything to it, or just thank these two gentlemen?
I want to thank everybody. These are topics we can go on all night about.
Right.
Not tonight,
we'll
because the Oscars are coming.
Whoop-de-damn-do.
Okay.
Yeah, the Oscars are coming.
I just want to say,
Denzel.
I never saw an industry.
Well, we had our own La La Land here today, so.
You did? All right.
I never saw an industry that's more in love with itself than the entertainment industry because they give out so many damn awards.
Have you ever seen the ESPYs? Have you ever seen the ESPYs? Jesus.
Right.
They become meaningless.
I just saw on ESPN today, they did a show on Jim Valvano where they were talking about personal fouls and how nothing in the book could be proved. I was just as furious as. Yes, they interviewed this NCAA guy who said that they had looked into it and they didn't found anything except that the kids were selling their sneakers. The truth of the matter was those SOBs never investigated. They never interviewed one person who I interviewed for personal fouls. How he could say that, it just makes my blood boil.
Actually, that's libelous.
They still have to fight fouls to win basketball games.
It's not libelous for him to say.
Nah, it's not libelous.
They still have to fight fouls to win basketball games.
Hmm?
And ESPN is a shill. They've always been a shill.
Well, of course they are, but that's their job. But gee whiz, it just. Anyhow, gentlemen, this has been wonderful.
It has been.
Right.
Yeah,
David, a real pleasure.
Alan, everything's okay. Thank you very much. And
thanks to all of you.
All right, folks. Have a wonderful week, and we'll be in touch. Take care.
Great.
Gentlemen. And thank you all out there. Keep on keeping on. Bye, everybody.